Welcome to the Product Design Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Coelen, founder of UX Cabin, where we create world-class web and mobile apps. I'm excited to bring you a behind-the-scenes look into the lives of some of the most interesting and talented people in product design. We'll get strategic advice on how they got to where they are today and things they wish they would have known earlier in their career. Hey, welcome to the Product Design Podcast. Today we have Brian Lin with us. He is a director of product design. Brian, we're excited to have you here, man.
Well, thanks for having me, Seth. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and where you live?
Yeah, so my name is Brian. I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It's not as cold as people ought to make it out right now. So thankfully we're in springtime. So you can see in my window, it's a little nice and bright, but I am a director of product design, as you said, Seth. I've worked for about 20 years, a little over that now in the design space, started in advertising. I worked my way through about 7 or 8 years in that before jumping into product design. And then sort of like serendipitously entered the design leadership space, being a senior as I grew my craft. And then I really kind of loved it and continued to do it. And now I, help designers grow and build teams for companies and startups.
That's really fantastic. It sounds like you've got a ton of experience. You've seen the industry change literally from inception to what it is today. And I'm excited to dig in a little bit with you. Why don't we just talk about your career journey a little bit and like maybe even a step back before that, how you even got interested in like advertising design in the first place?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I had the privilege and was really fortunate when I was in middle and high school to be part of this pilot program in Toronto. It was called Cyber Arts. It still exists today, by the way. But we were the first or second cohort, and it was this test of injecting art and technology into a lot of our core studies, so the geographies and the histories and all that. And we had a facility that was largely sponsored by big brands that we know today, the Kodaks and the Apples of the world at the time. This was like 1998, showing my age there. And that really set me down this path where technology, everything kind of creative and visual was really sort of like the thing I wanted to do professionally. I knew that at a very early age because of that program. And I just kind of set a goal for myself. It's like, I want to work for some of the biggest brands. Like I just want to work for the Nikes and the Coca-Colas. Young hotshot kid wanting to make it in the world kind of thing. I entered post-secondary, hated it because I realized I learned everything that I wanted to learn in that high school pilot program. We were actually learning.
Really?
I didn't realize at that time. We were learning some really advanced stuff actually that was being taught at the college level. And we didn't realize it. I took it for granted, obviously, as kids. But when we were kind of confronted with that, I know myself and a lot of peers, a lot of us kind of dropped out and started working.
Really?
We just try to get ourselves into the door, knocking on doors, doing anything that we could really with the body of work that we had. We had already had pretty decent body of work coming out of high school because of that program. So many of us entered the field just kind of nonchalantly with what we had. And it was not as difficult, obviously, as it is today. It was still an emerging and budding sort of industry. Product design wasn't even a thing then, like not officially. Zeitgeist has it. Anyway, so did that for a while, managed to achieve those goals. And for me, it was like, what now? I had reached this level of art director in my like 6th or 7th year in that space. And I was looking for my next thing. And then this little rectangular brick came out, by this gentleman named Steve Jobs, who came onto the stage, showed this little thing and said, this is going to change the world. And of course, we know today that absolutely happened. But what happened in the design space, interestingly enough, it's all of our clients, our phone was ringing off the hook because everyone's like, we need to design for this thing. We need to start building everything mobile. Of course, no one knew how to do that at the time. Everyone was designated a graphic designer, a web designer, full stop, for the most part.
Yeah.
So, but we were the closest to it. So they're like, well, you guys better learn. Figure it out. There's a lot of money on the table. Cool. So we did that. And I realized over time that there was this focus in creating experiences, both through this little device, through the web, and through spatial interactions. There's this whole other domain that we now know as today is like experience design, user experience design, all these titles and labels. And that's where I sort of swung the other way and started to you know, jump into the space of becoming a product design proper. And one of my first things that I did was one of my partners, we actually started our own boutique agency that in that time, this was like 2010. It was a product development shop for local businesses in Toronto that small SMBs, small businesses looking to launch their own digital presence. And that's what we would do. And that went well enough. And then my partner was like, I have daughters that need to go to college. So this is not stable enough. So let's close our doors. I'm like, no, that's fair. So then that's when I became like a full-time sort of product designer, taking that experience with me. And then, let's talk about 10 years in about 5 seconds. Gaming, fintech, health tech, food tech, culture tech, like workplace culture tech within 10 years, and kind of working my way through leading the charge in a lot of startups.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is fascinating. What have been some of the highs and lows of that career span as far as industry? What did you enjoy and dislike the most from those different companies?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a pretty extensive question. I mean, within each of their verticals, each of those verticals, there's a lot of everyone's also super talented. Like anyone you work with in any space, they all have their respective skills that makes work with these people. And you're always flabbergasted that just how much talent and work goes into building products, number one. So in the earlier days of my product design career, I'm always in awe of these people. I'm like, oh, wow, like logistically, communication, like it's just insane the amount of work that needs to go into it. So for me, one of the biggest kind of enjoyments across the board has always been working with different functions, not just the other designers, that is a given, but working with other functions and learning how they operate, how they benefit the end result, not just for our customers, but for our own internal users too, like within the company itself, building tools internally. It's not the sexiest thing or glamorous, but it's so important. And you realize that over time, how important building tools, good practices, good processes are. And over time, as I've kind of gone deeper into leadership, that sort of resonates with me. And it's sort of like in my, I don't know, like the thing that I always fall back on is like how important it is to serve the people that are actually building the things too. You'll hear that from me a lot. So that's one of the, I guess, one of the most enjoyable things across the board. Some of the least enjoyable things usually involve working with really outdated code or process in that way, really outdated practices that don't make sense given the stage that a company's at. So sometimes there's too much of it. You also hear me say the process won't save you. You can have the best process in the world, but if people aren't adhering to it, doesn't matter. Nothing gets done. So having the right balance between process and experimentation and the lack thereof of process is important given the stage of the company. But it's shocking to me still to this day, and it's the same problems everywhere I go. Right? People have this skewed perception of what good process is and bad process is. And there's no such thing. There's just process.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting because I feel like the process discussion is really that fine balance between a process that is streamlined and everything fits within it so that you can work better, faster, get people onboarded versus trying to put a round peg in a square hole and make everything fit within a process. And I'm sure you've seen from being at different companies is that each company has their own process, and one process might work very well for a company and it might not work nearly as well for another company. And
Right.
I think there's kind of this like misconception or idealistic view from like boot camps or just learning online or whatever that is like a very linear process and everything goes through like these stages and cycles in this order and in this time frame. And I think once folks get into like the actual job market, those things are kind of thrown out the window, or more so just like use this in general at this stage versus like a strictly linear process. But I'd be interested to hear your take on process and how it can help or hurt orgs and individuals.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the bootcamp process. I think bootcamps need to sort of check themselves from time to time, the kind of information that they relay in this regard, because it's a very academic way to look at it when they're, you know, talking about process as this linear thing, and they have this diagram up that looks beautiful and it's super simplistic. There's all these circles and arrows. And yeah, it is sort of like that in a nutshell. But to your point, Seth, it really is dependent on the appetite of the place that you're in to adopt pieces of that, either whole hog or parts of it, wherever it makes sense. So a lot of it comes back to the culture of the company that you're in, and the leadership at the top to be advocates for it. You're not going to get adherence to any sort of process without leadership sort of signing off on it across the board. The process, especially the design process, is not siloed to just design. Call it a design process, which is completely mislabeled, by the way. It's closer to like a pseudo-scientific method, right, of trying to get to a result that reflects reality. But it's not isolated to design, despite us calling it a design process. I mean, there's so many other stakeholders, there's so many other teams and functions that need to be involved in order for that process to be successful. You need to talk to your customers, as we all know. We also need to manage stakeholders and bring them into that process to get them to understand the direction we're headed in. We need to talk to customer support folks and customer experience folks who are engaged with the clients, sometimes sales. Like there's so many different inputs. So it'd be really disingenuous to say, oh yeah, it's a design process. Like designers have exclusive ownership on this thing. And that's BS. It's not true. And so that's one thing. In terms of kind of my opinions on process, I will always, when I step into a role, let's put it this way, whenever I join an org and I take stock of how things are operating, one of the first things that I'll go back to leadership with from a design perspective is like, okay, I've gone on a listening tour. I've talked to all of these leaders, other folks who are kind of stakeholders in this quote unquote design process. Here are the challenges that I'm seeing, and here are some of the opportunities for us to close some of these gaps, because there are always gaps.
Yep.
And that's one of the main things that I think the process acts as a good skeleton for how a function, it's a good blueprint for how things work within an organization, but it's up to the heralds of the blueprint or the engineers of the blueprint, right? To keep it running, like to keep that machine actually working and maintained. So that process requires as much sort of upkeep and staying on top of as any sort of product or code base. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in a weird sense, you could almost align process to be, instead of this linear process, it's more like these tools that you have that you need to employ at the right time. So it's like
Yeah.
in like an MMA fight, like if you're on the ground, you know that you have to, do one of like four things. And depending on who you're fighting, it could be any one of those four things. Or like in the design realm, you have a tight deadline and you have to produce a prototype by the end of the week. Like, is it worth it to wireframe it first? Is it worth it to do anything with a style guide first? It's like, no, it's like we need to figure out what we need to cut, what we need to shape for our specific scenario. And like knowing the full process, the full like design process from like ideation to research to design, I think is necessary, but it's about employing what is most expedient or what is most useful in each given context.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things that we have to sort of like hustle to figure out, right? and to also check ourselves as designers to make sure we're exactly deploying the right tools of the trade in that framework, in that toolbox. One of the, it's interesting you equated it to an MMA fact. Like in other conversations I've been on, I used street fight as
Yeah,
as an analogy as well. Street fight, because you have to be scrappy. It's not always like, okay, there are rules, yes, but it's like you understand the process, you understand what rules exist, but you need to also know how to be scrappy around them, depending on the situation.
totally, totally. So one other question I have, thinking about all the different types of orgs you've worked in. So, you know, kind of heard that you did your own agency type of thing, which has its own risk and unique challenges. You've also worked at a handful of other orgs in all these different industries and all these different sizes. Maybe you could like give us a little overview of the different sizes and types of organizations and like how design looks different at different types of companies.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think in the advertising space, design is pretty much IC specific, right? You are contributing to the success of a client towards a deadline, towards a timeline, and you still go through the rigors of going through discovery stages and research and all that, but with a much tighter team, smaller team typically. You're doing it in a way that once you've shipped it, you move on to the next thing, right? That's just agency world. So there's not as much room for iteration. It's usually campaign focused, right? So that's one key difference from a product specific company, a dedicated product org with a product that they're selling, whether it's SaaS, service oriented, what have you, where there is more room to iterate, because you are your own client.
Yeah.
You are constantly iterating on the thing that you're building for yourself and for your customers. So that's the main difference between agency and like a dedicated product,
Sure.
or a singular product. In terms of sizes and industry, when you're an early stage startup, basically everyone that's part of your, let's say, 8-person team, because that's usually how it goes. It starts out that way. You're wearing a lot of different hats, designer included. So designer might also be a researcher. It could also be a front end developer as well. They could be like a UI specialist on the front end side. They may have a lot of, so generalists are typically highly sought after in that stage, where someone has a lot of different skill sets that they can employ to move the product along its stages. Your leadership team will be your stakeholders. COO could likely be your product manager, right? That's just how it goes. As a company scales up in size, you now have more specialized functions because the team is bigger, the business is growing. There's now a bit more product market fit, as is what we call it, where you start to understand what is resonating with your customers in the market. So you have now dedicated teams that are built around these problems, around these business units, as we call them. So now we have dedicated designers, engineers, and product managers specializing in their respective domains, dedicated to a singular part of the product.
Yeah, I talk with some of my friends who are like in big orgs, and I find out like they have these super specialized roles, like someone who just does information architecture all day, every day. And I'm just like, me coming from primarily like agency world, I'm like, that blows my mind, because that is like one of like 12 things I do on a daily basis.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, the problem space within each of those individual specializations is also far bigger, right?
Yes.
Like someone who is working at a bank, right? Like a national bank, with billions of dollars on the line, and you're working on this very specific product for a bank, because a bank has like hundreds of different products and services that they're offering. And there are teams, multiple teams dedicated to each one. And each of those teams dedicated like to a slice of a problem, because it's just that big. So that slice is maybe equivalent to like the startup's entire product portfolio in
Yes.
terms of scope. So it makes sense that you have these really dedicated specialists positioned to build these things.
Totally, totally. So you have, yeah, like we said, been in the game for a while, and we look back and we see all the things that we wish we would have known or wish we would have done when we were younger. Curious to see what you would look back and tell yourself something you wish you knew when you were starting out that you know now.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that two ways actually, because I want to say something that I hope our listeners, many of them who might be getting into business, will find valuable. The thing that actually helped me the most in my early days, and I still lean on this today, is having a really strong community of peers around me all the time that I feel comfortable sharing my work, getting real candid feedback from them, and just kind of learning and building and keeping each other accountable to what we're showing and doing constant. Without that support structure, it's really challenging to grow as a designer. Like you need people around you to both support you, but also be very critical that aren't just going to cheer you, right? So that was a huge, and because of what I said in my intro of like having that being part of that pilot program and all of us kind of coming up together as a class, those were my peers. That was my circle, and we kept and we I still keep in touch with many of them today, right? And we still talk about things professionally, personally, and it's a beautiful thing. So that I encourage people who are just starting out to find your community, like find your peers.
Where do you think the corollary group someone could find in today's day and age? Like, is that like an online community you think, or like local meetups, or
Both, all of the above. Yeah. Any way you can get it. Like you'll know when you've met people that are be like, yep, this person is going to be an important, like this person will help me grow. This person will be a valuable ally. And you to them as well. And so it's a two-way street, it's a quid pro quo thing. It's all of those wonderful things. So definitely meetups. If you're in a city that runs meetups or you're not far from them, definitely attend. You'll meet lots of great people. During meetups, they typically reserve a chunk of time where people can network and chat and, just sort of ingratiate yourself into that space. Online communities for sure, right? Like that's not something we had back then, 20 plus years ago. We didn't have the Slacks or the Discords of the world.
right?
So definitely, you know, it's also just everything's so much more accessible. So there's no real excuse not to like just being uncomfortable with the uncomfortable of putting your work out there, putting yourself out there is also part of being a designer. You're going to have to do
Yeah,
it in the workplace,
yeah.
right?
I think what you said kind of goes along with whoever said the quote about you are the sum of the like your five closest friends or whatever. And I
Mhm.
think that's probably more speaking to like character issues, but I think there's something also in the professional field of like, hey, I want to surround myself with people who are going in the same direction or who will pull me in the direction I want to go. I think it's kind of hard because like you're starting out in design and you see the top like 10 design influencers and you're like, oh, I just if only I could have one of them mentor me. And it's like it's not gonna happen. But if you
Yep.
can find someone who's like, young and hungry and can help pull you and you help pull them along and build each other up when you need and critique each other and sharpen each other. I think that's the realistic form of camaraderie and mentoring that people are going to be able to find. Someone on our team even created like a little YouTube community Slack group where they just share links, talk to each other, help each other out with when they're going through stuff, opportunities they see. And I think to your point, it's one of those things where it's available. It just takes the initiative for someone to do it and engage with that.
Yeah. Growing together is going to be far more valuable and interesting, really. experientially, like, as you grow as a professional, then having someone who is an influencer or whatnot, like, yes, look up to them, yes, learn from them, but have realistic expectations and be real with yourself about how you can grow. Like, that's part of being a good practitioner of this craft. And I say practitioner, and I equate it to being a tradesperson. Right? We are always practicing. It doesn't matter how senior or how seasoned you are. We are always practicing what we do to improve. So it's better to ally yourself with folks who are also of that mindset.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's one thing that you did really well from the beginning. Looking back, that you say everyone needs to do this.
Yes.
Anything that you look back and say, I wish I knew this when I was younger?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I was, fortunate where I was exposed to a lot of stuff early on in my career. I guess I'll maybe reframe that a little bit. The things that I wish I did less of, or I shouldn't have been doing, I guess, is being a bit way more humble than I like. Nowadays, I'm humbled every day by either my own team, by other folks, because the world's so much bigger and you see what's out there, right?
Right.
Versus before. But when you were young and you're trying to make your mark in the world, you are really, really confident to a fault. And I know a lot of my peers who I came up with exactly the same as me. We were really overconfident to a fault. But that did open a lot of doors in both good ways, but also in bad ways, because I burned a lot of bridges when I was young as well. That's obviously something you want to avoid. But I think one of the things that I also wish I didn't do was constantly kind of compare myself to those influencers and those folks that were further along in their own journeys. Your journey is just starting. You can't be looking at a senior who has 10, 20 years of experience and being like, why can't I be like that? It's like, because it's not realistic. You're still at the bottom of
It's
the
going to take time.
Yeah. Right. It takes a
Totally.
lot of practice. Yeah. So for me, I would beat myself up when I was younger, being like, why am I not this good yet? And then someone would have to bring me back down and be, usually a peer in this community, right? Or someone would be like, what are you talking about, Brian? Like, you're doing all right. You're doing fine. You need that support too, because it's
Right.
easy as a designer, as we can all attest, like imposter syndrome and not feeling like you're good enough. It's constantly creeping up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's like such a need for discernment on what is, signal versus noise on like my skill set. Like you said, like, met a lot of designers who are kind of self-deceived and they think they're a lot better than they are. And they have a lot of things that they need to work on that they don't see. They're blind to it.
Mhm.
And on the flip side, a lot of people who are much better than they give themselves credit for at their stage of design. And you don't know what you don't know. And I think both groups, it's one of those things where having more people around you informs both of those roles. If you're super cocky and you got a lot of people around you, that's going to help tamper down that and help humble you, right? Because you're going to see like other people at your stage or different stages being able to excel or be at your level. And you're like, okay, I'm not superstar. And conversely, if you're real down on yourself and you're like, I've been doing this for a year and I'm not as good as so and so. It's like, okay, well, they're fifth year and they've worked at a bunch of companies, right? So I think, yeah, that aspect of knowing your peers and where they're at and how you're all kind of moving together is another piece that can really help both of those personas.
Exactly, precisely that, and it keeps you accountable, because in order to get better at design, it's not about reading everything under the sun. Right. I get
Right.
questions like that all the time. Like, it's like, what should I read? How do I get better? Like, what YouTube videos do you watch? And my answer is always the same: practice. Go make stuff. Right. It's okay. Like, it's okay if it sucks. That's part of the story. I still make things that suck all the time.
Yep.
Like, it's part of what we do as creatives, as designers, as artists for some of us, and it's okay. And I think a lot of people feel like they need to accrue all this knowledge, especially now when with social media and all that. Again, not a thing back when we were starting out, but now that there's so many points of comparison and there's so much visual noise. To your point earlier about noise versus signal, signal versus noise, like you need to be accountable to yourself first and foremost and think, okay, what am I really lacking? What do I not feel confident about? Like look inward and practice those things. You feel like your UI skills are weak. Okay, go practice your UI skills. Like try to not rebuild, but redesign or imitate some of the more popular apps out there or the more popular things that you're into. UX skills not a thing. Practice that. Go talk to people, talk to your customers, start doing some IA work, start thinking about what it means from a more holistic standpoint, like practice those things. And of course, supplement that with literature and supplement, but don't feel like you need to know everything.
Yeah.
First and foremost, before you start, biggest, the biggest pitfall that I see a lot of young designers or aspiring designers fall into is they don't start. They're just constantly reading and reading and consuming. But it's like none of that has been applied.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. At UX Cabin, we've run 2 internships that have been really fun. And there's a lot of people that want to get involved with that. And I've literally had like people reach out and say like, hey, like I want to do this. I actually want to work for free. I want to intern for free. And will contact me over a number of period of months of like, hey, I want to do this. I want to be involved. And my response to them is like, okay, that's great. We're full for this time, but I'll start doing the work now. Like the only secret that we would give you is kind of that built-in deadline of like, you have to do your certain things by this time. But it's like, if you don't get this, you should be building on your own and you should be accumulating your portfolio, and you do not need anyone to tell you to do that. And if you come back to me in 3 months and you ask for an internship and you haven't done anything, my answer is going to be the same. You need to go back and you need to start. You just need to start doing something now.
That's right.
It's like that saying of like, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. Like, don't sit on your hands and wait for someone to give you an opportunity. Make your own opportunity. Make your own, increase your circle of luck by getting started.
100%.
So since you've been kind of directing and managing a lot of these design teams, it'd be interesting to see kind of what are the different expectations that you have for senior level designers versus entry level designers.
Yeah. So it's funny too, just for those listening, and this is how Seth and I got in touch. He saw some of the things I was writing on LinkedIn and whatnot, and I speak very passionately about this because I think there's a general, like a skewed perspective. Either I don't blame any particular channel in particular for this. I think it's just a combination of this narrative that's been building over the years about what an entry designer should be doing. And for me, an entry level designer is there to learn, right? I mean, that's the highest level way of saying that, to learn and to execute. So if I'm going to hire you as an entry level designer, the expectation is that you have strong foundations. You've already demonstrated strong foundations in design, right? You know about good hierarchy. You can demonstrate your understanding of color theory. Like these are basic design. You can't call yourself a designer without knowing this stuff. And a lot of the times what I'm seeing for folks who are applying, they don't demonstrate that very evident. They go straight into deliverables or what have you, straight into wireframe. So entry level, circle back. Entry level is a lot of it is on execution. When you join a team in the workplace, you're expected to execute. You're basically expected. This is going to sound terrible. You're going to receive marching orders, right? That's the whole shtick. You're going to receive marching orders from seniors and managers, and you're expected to execute on those marching orders. to a degree of quality that you've demonstrated.
Yep.
That's number one. Now, kind of alongside that, as an entry level designer, though, you're going to be starting to work with other functions. So those deliverables that you're executing on, you're also expected to get information from sources that are the SMEs or the subject matter experts in those respective domains. So if you need input from sales, you go to the sales team and just talk to people there. You're expected to be proactive in these things. Even as an early stage designer, you're not going to be given everything. It's never like that. Even as a senior, you're never given anything. You need to go out and seek that information that you're missing. So you need to be very cognizant of it. So those are the main two things that an entry level designer will be expected to do: to execute and to information gather in order to perform the first function at your best of your ability.
Yeah. And just to jump in, and I think one thing to kind of set expectations for on like the junior level is there's going to be a lot of things that you do that is just taking repeatable tasks that help free up time for more senior level people to do more strategy level or harder things, right? So it's like,
Right.
it might be like, okay, go attach color styles to this 1,000 icon library. And it's a very tedious task. But through that, maybe you learn, like you just need to get those reps in. You need to figure out like, how do I select all the layers at one time? How do I select multiple things? How can I get better at my tool that I'm using to do this faster next time? And you just need that seat time to be able to like build in that muscle memory, figure out how to do it. And it's just like, it's boring. It's, repetitive, but you're getting muscle memory on how to use your tool and how to do something in the right way. And it's not like the most sexy thing, but it's like, this is an investment in your leveling up, right? You do this 50 times, you're going to be awesome at it. And you're going to figure out shortcuts and plugins and all the good stuff on how to, do it better and faster next time.
Yeah. It's a martial art, right? It's like being in a martial art or practicing a martial art where you're doing the rigorous daily routine of practicing your punches, doing leg presses, like whatever it might be, doing those reps over and over again until they become so second nature to you within the context of what you're doing. You don't even need to think about it. And you're so good at it. You're so fast at it because efficiency is really important.
Absolutely. I think to your second point, like junior designers can really minimize the skills gap with like hustle on like the communication, follow up, and kind of going the extra mile on that end. It's like maybe you can take really good meeting notes and you can send a follow up to everyone so we're all on the same page. And that just takes a little bit of like hustle and determination. You don't have to be super good at design to do that. Or maybe you're really good at following up with people, like you said about, talking to the different departments and whatnot. It's like, you probably have a little bit more time on your hands than some of the more senior level people. So why don't you just take it upon yourself to, kind of do these hustle tasks that really just elevate you and make you more valuable to the team while your skills are still developing.
That's right. And exactly that. It's really important for juniors to feel, they should feel supported by their management team and it's really important that framework, that support system exists within a company so that juniors do feel empowered to do these types of things. They don't feel like it's outside of their role or something to that effect. And I would say, kind of in tandem to what you're saying, also being very open to feedback.
Yeah.
Right. You're seeking it constantly you should be so hungry for that because you're learning. You're in this learning mode as a junior constantly. And through that learning, through that feedback collection, through those reps you're doing, you are going to fundamentally, like almost on a subconscious level, you will learn how a product, how a piece of work starts from concept to finish, because you will be part of that process throughout. And even as a junior, you may not necessarily realize it, but it will happen. It happens because you're just kind of practicing all these things together. The whole sort of sum of that is the output, is that final result.
Yep. Absolutely. Love it. Love it. So As this junior progresses to, mid senior level stages, what are some of the things that a more senior person might be responsible for?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this is a question I get asked a lot, the difference between kind of associate junior level to mid level. One of the main differences is what I like to call kind of like the scope of impact, right? Someone who is a senior is going to have far greater sort of situational awareness because they've done all the things we just talked about, right? They've gone through those rigors. So now they're aware and sort of hyper attuned to looking for those opportunities to not just help, but possibly lead. Seniors are by default leaders and often subject matter experts in the pod, the team that they're situated in. So the thing that I expect from my seniors is to kind of be that champion for the intermediate and juniors on the team, to be able to help delegate work because they're able to understand the priorities of these things. Because again, that situational awareness has been developed over the years, and they're able to communicate that very concisely, right? They should be able to communicate the value of those things downstream to the team. That's really the thing that's the big differentiator. It's like they have this level of awareness and leadership capability that hasn't been fully trained or strengthened yet at the more junior levels.
Yeah, I think it's like being able to come into a project, assess it, and know what needs to be done next, know what vulnerabilities there are, and know
That's
like
right.
where to put the firepower. Like a senior could come into a 3 month project, a few weeks in and be
And
able
save
to
it.
identify. Yes, exactly. And just be like, oh, we need to establish this, or we need to start using the design system, or we need to get buy-in before we go too much further on this. And it's almost like as a senior, when you're coming into a file or whatever, it's like you can work faster because you know how to put guardrails on things. You don't have
Correct.
to think about where like a side nav goes. You're like, okay, probably going to go on the left side and it's probably going to, look like this. And the juniors kind of have to like spin their wheels on that a little bit. And you're supposed to. You're supposed to like, I don't know, how big should I make my buttons? Should they be 42 pixels tall? It's like, as a senior, like, okay, well, if it's mobile, it has to be at least this tall because that, goes with the guidelines. And you can move so much faster because you know the guardrails and you can assess the situation and you can see the train coming ahead and
That's right.
and when you have to get off the track, basically.
Yeah, and you know when it makes sense to break it. You know
Yep.
when to break the mold, when the opportunity presents itself to break out of a system, because you can see the value of doing that. And on top of that, you have the trust and the influence with other functions, not within your team, but other functions already, to be able to make that case and convince them to come along for that ride, right? Even if it adds 3 days to development time, you're able to articulate the value as a senior designer, senior plus designer, tactically, strategically, experientially. This is why this makes sense and why it's worth the additional investment to do this right.
Totally. Totally. Now, when someone comes to you and they're like, say they're within a team and they they want to level up and they want to understand what it takes to get to the next level. A lot of times I'm kind of at a loss because it's just like, well, you're doing good. You just need to do this, you just need to do 30 projects and you'll be better. Do you have any any more tangible advice to give or analysis that can be done that kind of helps designers know where their gaps might be?
Yeah, so I actually did this recently with the team as part of our, I guess, 2022 kind of growth plan. And one of the things I like to do as a kind of a director level individual in the company is each individual gets a skill assessment from me. It's a two-parter. they go through an exercise where they answer a questionnaire or survey that focuses on them kind of digging deep into their own sort of proficiencies or vulnerabilities and answering these questions honestly. I take those answers and then formulate a skill assessment exercise that we do in a one-on-one for 45 minutes to an hour. And through that exercise together, we come out the other side with themes, basically, like things that they're really interested in pursuing, coupled with conversations with, will these things help me level up to the next title,
Yeah.
next promotion. So we have very candid and honest conversations about that. So for example, one designer on my team is really, really interested in motion design, really wants to practice that stuff. And of course, during that conversation, I'm like, that's awesome. That's wonderful and delightful. And it's going to add a lot of value to the tool set. But in the company that we're in right now, that's not something that's going to be highly valued. Right.
Yeah.
So we can pursue that as a skill development thing, but it's not going to be something that will add to yours, kind of like your scorecard, right?
Right. Right.
Leading up to the next level. And do you agree? Sign on the dotted line. That kind of, and so we have these kind of conversations, right? Very candidly between manager and direct report. And I would encourage people, it's not exactly like the most tangible answer, I guess you're looking for there, Seth, but I guess the takeaway I would say, though, or I would encourage people to do is do that same sort of assessment with yourself, right? Be very honest about where you are as an IC, as an individual contributor, as a designer. Where are those gaps? And if you're working with seniors already, hopefully, if you're in an org working with seniors who are mentors, who are maybe your managers, even potentially, to working with those individuals to help sort of sanity check that. It's like you taking a look at yourself. You're like, this is where I think I'm lacking. This is where I think some opportunities exist. Put it in front of someone who has been through this already. And it doesn't have to be in your company. It could be just book a call with a senior, reach out to a senior, have them look at it. And then the two of you sort of come together and identify what those next things are needed. A lot of, again, what we talked about earlier about becoming the senior really talks about being the sort of the subject matter expert in either on the team or of the thing that you're responsible for. So what is it going to take to get to that spot?
Yep.
To become that trusted partner in your organization?
Yeah. That's great advice. Really appreciate that. I think one of the things that's tough as a designer is like, you're probably a designer who's like extremely self-aware and you feel too vulnerable to do that because you feel like you have deficiencies everywhere. But I think part of being a designer is knowing that it's like you have to open yourself up to vulnerabilities every single day, whether it's presenting work to clients, stakeholders, internal teammates. And the way we get better is to measure where we are and to understand fully where we are and to recalibrate when we're like, oh, I thought I was really good at this, but I'm not. And be able to take that with humility and understanding and kind of have that mindset of just, you can learn anything from anyone. Like, even if it's a senior that is a total jerk and you don't respect them, it's like, well, you can just practice how to receive feedback well from a, not so nice person. That's a skill. That's a great skill that you're going to need to learn.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's right. It's anyone and everyone can be valuable learning experiences or people that you can learn from. And it's important to take time to digest that. And I don't mean that, philosophically, like should be kind of reflecting or keeping a journal, and however you want to track your own progress as a designer, as a human being, is completely on you, but track progress.
Yeah.
Right? Like try to make sure you check yourself on a semi-regular cadence in order to make sure that you are in fact making progress and that the investments that you're making in yourself and your work are paying off. And it could be little by little, right? It doesn't have to happen all at once. You're not going to start, in January and then by June you'll be like a rock star in the thing necessarily, right?
Right.
And if you are, great, like more power to you. You're a phenomenal. But
Right.
for most people, it's going to take longer than that. But that's why it's really important to take some time every now and then. And I use the 6 month timeline intentionally because that's how often I do it. Because every 6 months, I will ask myself the same questions. Here are the things I set out to do. Did I accomplish them? Are the people that I admire the same people that I admire? Did that change? Right? And if it did change, why did it change? And I'm going
Yeah.
to start thinking about those moments over the last 6 months that may have led. So it's like these types of self-reflection moments are especially important for any kind of growth-minded individual.
Yeah. Awesome. Wanted to close out this episode with kind of a quandary that seems to be in the design community right now. I think on one hand, you have companies that literally can't hire enough senior principal level people. Seems like everyone's hiring, right? And then the other side, you have a plethora of people trying to get their first design job. And it seems like there is an infinite amount of entry level designers trying to get into, the workforce. I'd be curious if you think that perception is accurate, and I guess more on the entry level side, what people can do to land that first job and what strategies they should take if you think that is a reality where there's too many juniors and not enough jobs on that end.
Yeah. My main opinion on this is, well, like TLDR, yes, I agree. But there's a good reason for that. And a lot of that comes back to companies being willing to invest in people that they bring on. And entry levels, it sounds terrible, but it's hard to justify that investment if the needs of the business require more specialization
Sure.
or expertise fast,
Sure.
which is unfortunately the pace that the world moves in now. That's kind of the thing. So to say, okay, I'm going to spend 90 days ramping up a early stage designer, a junior first job, is really hard to justify from a business standpoint.
Yep.
To do, right? The ROI is tough to justify. And that sounds really cold and bureaucratic, and it is. It just,
Right.
however, the way to close that gap and to give businesses more confidence in a junior's ability, it kind of comes back to one of the first points that we were talking about is your craft needs to be good. The foundations need to be demonstrated very evidently to your employer when you're going through the interview process. A lot of folks that are transitioning careers, going through boot camps, they don't demonstrate that because that's not what they're taught. It's not their fault. I just want to make that clear. It's not their fault. It's just not something that is focused on at boot camps. You're not learning about color theory. You're learning about how to talk to customers. You're learning about how to wireframe. You're learning about all these process things. Again, we're going full circle on all these topics.
Yep.
You're learning about all these process things, but you're not learning how to design.
Yeah.
You're actually not learning how to visually put things together in a way that's attractive, that is approachable, that is sustainable. So if a junior, like my advice to juniors is to learn as much about that side of the craft as you can, because, and I'll talk about this all day and night. When I go through 300 to 500 portfolios during a hiring season, and this is like one rule, right? And because that's how saturated it is out there.
Yeah.
At a minimum. And that's not even discounting like the big tech, Google and Amazon, 10K plus, easy, right? How many portfolios do you think a hiring manager humanely will be able to go through before their eyes kind of glaze over?
Yeah.
So if your portfolio looks very cookie cutterish and it follows that linear design process, you're not going to get people's attention. You may be an intelligent, really strong and articulate person. But if it follows and looks like everyone else's, it's not going to draw people's attention.
Yep.
Similarly, if you are writing essays on your portfolios in your case studies, hiring managers don't have time for that.
Nope.
So make sure you blow out those main points that you want hiring managers to look for, to kind of take away when they're looking, and to encourage them to dig deeper. Give them the opportunity to dig deeper, but don't make them dig deeper in order to learn more, because they won't.
Yep.
I won't.
Yeah. And I think another thing to kind of go along with that is like, if you're in that job searching stage, I think you have to be strategic with your time as to like, you could mass apply to 1 million jobs and see the results of that. Or you could try to 1% improve your portfolio or design piece or even fake design work to demonstrate your competency. And I'm not saying don't apply to jobs or don't reach out, but if you're not getting hired and you're just applying, you've got to start to incrementally improve, replace case studies, change things up, move your design skills forward. I think people get to the stage of like, I've done my boot camp or I've done this process or this project. I'm going to stop doing any design stuff until I get hired. And that's when I'm going to start like learning. And it's like, there's a lot of people in line for this. You got to keep pushing forward and like figure out how to do a different like screenshot on your mockup, figure out how to do like a little bit more beautiful product shot or interaction or whatever it takes, and then apply, right? Figure out what's not working and stretch your design skills while you're applying, not waiting till you get that first gig.
Yeah, like realistically, I 100% agree. Realistically, people who come out of boot camps, and again, not their fault, because boot camps, this is a hot, spicy topic. Boot camps don't really prepare you for jobs. They don't. They say they do. Of course they do. They're for profit. But realistically, the portfolio is not ready. Most portfolios that I've seen, bootcamp portfolios, are not ready for hiring because they don't demonstrate that you know how to do the job, like for realsies.
Right.
Right. Because it's just like, when I look at it, I'm like, so I know, so this tells me you know how to get through a boot camp.
Right.
And that's fine. But have you actually applied critical thinking into what the job description that you've been reading, that you're, all these companies that you're looking to apply to, and what they're talking about in those job descriptions? Can you confidently say your portfolio answers each of these bullets? That you've demonstrated that you have very strong visual design skills, or that you have really strong critical thinking? Is that stuff demonstrated? Or are you just checking a box? Is your portfolio just saying like, I did the thing and then I did this next thing and I did the other thing after that? That's how most portfolios sound like when they come out of boot camps, because that's the formula.
Right.
And the answer is no, of course. Like, that's not how design is practiced. And it's not a good representation of what it's actually like out there. So if I come away looking at your portfolio with the perception of this person can't do the job, then I move on. That's what every hiring manager in the world is trying to answer. Does this person demonstrate that they will add value to what I have going on right now in the company? The answer is yes. You get a second interview.
Yep. Totally. Well, Brian, you have shared so much good info with us. I think we've hit on a number of topics that haven't been discussed fully here on this podcast yet. And I really appreciate your time and everything that you've shared. I feel like we could talk for probably another hour or so, but maybe we'll save that for another time. But yeah, I really appreciate the time and thank you for everything you've shared.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Seth. Thanks for having me on. And I hope the listeners here, they find it valuable too.
Absolutely. All right. Well, till next time.
Till next time. Thanks, Seth.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us today on the Product Design Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure and go follow our guests. Let them know they did a great job and you learned a lot. More to come in the following weeks as we bring on new guests. Please hit that subscribe button so that you will get these podcasts and learn a ton about the product design community. Excited to see you next time. Thanks.